At 2:47 a.m. on March 25, 1975, Sylvester Stallone sat at a small wooden table in his Los Angeles apartment and wrote 6 words that would change his life. ROCKY, written by Sylvester Stallone. He'd been awake for 22 hours straight. His hand ached, his eyes burned, but his mind was on fire with something he'd never felt before: absolute certainty. For the first time in his 28 years of relentless failure, he knew exactly what he had to do. 7 hours earlier, he'd watched a boxing match that nobody expected to matter. Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner at the Richfield Coliseum in Ohio. Stallone couldn't afford the closed-circuit television fee, so he'd watched it at a friend's apartment, sitting on a worn couch with a beer he'd nursed for 3 hours to make it last. Chuck Wepner was a journeyman fighter from Bayonne, New Jersey. The Bayonne Bleeder, they called him, because he cut easily and bled profusely in almost every fight. He worked as a liquor salesman when he wasn't boxing. Nobody, absolutely nobody, gave him a chance against Ali, the greatest fighter who ever lived. The odds were 40-1 against Wepner. Sports writers called the fight a joke. Some demanded it be canceled to prevent a slaughter. But Wepner lasted 15 rounds. Stallone watched that fight with tears streaming down his face. He watched Wepner get knocked down multiple times. He watched the blood pour from cuts above both eyes. He watched Wepner's face swell into something barely recognizable as human. And he watched Wepner keep getting up, keep swinging, keep fighting, even though everyone, including Wepner himself, knew he couldn't win. In the 10th round, with just 19 seconds remaining, the referee stopped the fight. Ali won by technical knockout. Wepner had lost. But somehow, Wepner had also won something more important. He'd proven that an underdog could stand in the ring with greatness and not be destroyed. He'd gone the distance. He'd earned respect through sheer stubbornness and heart. When the fight ended, Stallone stood up from that couch and told his friend something that sounded insane. "I'm going to write a movie about that. And I'm going to star in it." His friend laughed. Everyone laughed. Stallone was nobody. He'd had bit parts in 4 forgettable films. He'd been rejected by every major casting agent in Hollywood. He had $106 in his bank account and a wife who was threatening to leave him if he didn't get a real job. But Stallone wasn't joking. He went home and started writing immediately. He wrote for 72 hours without stopping. The first draft of Rocky emerged like a fevered dream, urgent, raw, and absolutely necessary. Stallone wrote in longhand because his typewriter had broken months ago and he couldn't afford to repair it. He wrote on cheap notebook paper, the kind that tears easily, the ink sometimes bleeding through to the page beneath. He didn't eat. He barely slept, maybe 4 hours total over 3 days, collapsing at the table for short periods before his mind jolted him awake with another scene, another piece of dialogue, another moment that Rocky needed to live through. His wife checked on him occasionally, worried about his mental state. She'd seen him obsessed before Stallone had a pattern of throwing himself completely into ideas that never worked out. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. "You need to sleep," she told him on the 2nd day. "You need to eat something." "I can't stop," Stallone replied, not looking up from the paper. "If I stop, I'll lose it. It's all in my head right now, and if I stop, it'll disappear." She left him alone after that, frightened by the intensity in his voice. By the end of the 3rd day, Stallone had 90 pages. The story was simple on the surface. Rocky Balboa, a small-time boxer working as a muscle for a loan shark in Philadelphia, gets an impossible shot at the heavyweight championship when the scheduled opponent drops out, and the champion's promoters need a local fighter to fill the slot. Rocky knows he can't win, but he sets one goal: to go the distance, to still be standing when the final bell rings. But beneath that simple plot was something deeper. Rocky wasn't really about boxing. It was about dignity. About a man who'd been told his entire life that he was nothing a bum, in Rocky's own words, getting one chance to prove otherwise, not to the world but to himself. Stallone poured everything into that script. every rejection he'd suffered. Every casting agent who'd told him his face was too droopy, his speech too slurred, his body too weird. Every night he'd gone to bed in that tiny apartment wondering if he should just give up and go back to New York, get a real job, except that he'd never be an actor. Rocky Balboa was Sylvester Stallone, and Sylvester Stallone was Rocky Balboa. When he finished the last page, Stallone read the entire script once more. Then he put his head down on the table and slept for 16 hours straight. Within a week, through connections he'd made from his minor film roles, the script reached producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff at United Artists. They read it overnight. The next morning, they called Stallone's agent with an offer, $75,000 for the script. For Stallone, this was a miracle. $75,000 was more money than he'd ever imagined having. It would pay off all his debts. It would save his marriage. It would give him breathing room to keep pursuing acting without the constant terror of eviction and starvation. His agent was ecstatic. "Take it," he urged. "Take it immediately before they change their minds." But Stallone asked one question: who do they want to play Rocky? The answer made his blood freeze. They're thinking Ryan O'Neal, or maybe Burt Reynolds. They haven't decided yet. Stallone said no to the $75,000. His agent thought he'd misheard. "What?" "No," Stallone repeated. "I have to play Rocky. That's non-negotiable." The agent explained reality to Stallone like he was speaking to a child. "You're not a star. You're barely a working actor. You've had, 4 bit parts? 5? Nobody knows who you are. Nobody's going to see a movie because Sylvester Stallone is in it. But Ryan O'Neal, Burt Reynolds, they're box office gold. They're offering you $75,000 for a script you wrote in 3 days. Take the money." Stallone refused. The producers, thinking this was a negotiation tactic, increased their offer. $100,000, then $125,000, then $175,000. Stallone kept saying no. His wife stopped speaking to him. She couldn't comprehend what he was doing. They were 3 months behind on rent. The electricity had been shut off. They were eating pasta with ketchup because they couldn't afford sauce. And he was turning down life-changing money because of pride, because of ego. "You're destroying us," she screamed at him one night. "You're destroying our marriage, our life, everything. For what? For some fantasy that you're going to be a movie star?" Stallone tried to explain. "I wrote this story about a man who gets one shot at making something of himself. One shot at proving he's not just another bum. If I sell this script and let someone else play Rocky, then I'm betraying everything the character stands for. I'm betraying myself, don't you see? Rocky is me. If I don't play him, the whole thing is a lie." She didn't see. She packed a bag and went to stay with her sister. The producers made their final offer, $360,000. $360,000 for a script Stallone had written in 72 hours. It was an astronomical sum in 1975 equivalent to nearly $2 million today. It was more money than Stallone would earn in 10 lifetimes of struggle. His agent delivered the offer in person, sitting across from Stallone in that depressing apartment with its broken furniture and water-stained walls. "This is it," the agent said. "This is the last offer. If you say no to this, they're walking away. They'll find another underdog boxing script. There are a million of them floating around Hollywood. You'll have nothing. You understand?" "Nothing." Stallone sat there for a long time, staring at his hands. They were still cramped from writing the script. He thought about his wife leaving. He thought about the eviction notice on his door. He thought about the humiliation of being 28 years old and having nothing to show for a decade of trying. And then he thought about the ending of Rocky, the moment when Rocky loses the fight but wins something more important. The moment when he proves to himself that he's not a bum. The moment when he goes the distance. "No," Stallone said quietly. "I have to play Rocky." The agent stood up and walked out without another word. That professional relationship was over. United Artists walked away from the project. For 2 months, the script sat in limbo. Stallone had turned down $360,000, and now it looked like he'd turned down his only chance at selling the script at all. Other producers heard about his demands, that he had to star in a movie he'd written, despite having no box office draw whatsoever, and dismissed him as delusional. His wife filed for separation. His agent dropped him. His friends stopped calling because they couldn't stand watching him destroy himself. Stallone worked part-time at a movie theater to pay rent. At night, he'd read the Rocky script again and again, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Then, in June 1975, the producers came back with a different proposal. They'd do the movie with Stallone as Rocky, but on these conditions: a microscopic budget of $1 million, shooting schedule of only 28 days, and Stallone would be paid just $35,000 for both writing and starring. He'd also get 10% of the net profits, if there were any profits, which nobody expected. It was a fraction of what they'd originally offered for the script alone. It was borderline insulting. It was designed to make him say no. Stallone said yes before they'd finished explaining the terms. Production began in January 1976. The movie was shot guerrilla style on the streets of Philadelphia with a mostly unknown cast. Talia Shire, who played Adrian, had one major credit, The Godfather Part II. Burgess Meredith, who played Mickey, was a respected character actor, but not a star. Carl Weathers, who played Apollo Creed, had appeared in a few blaxploitation films. Burt Young, who played Paulie, was a journeyman actor who'd never had a leading role. The director, John Avildsen, had directed one well-regarded film, Save the Tiger, with Jack Lemmon, but was considered a risky choice. Everything about Rocky screamed low-budget disaster. Industry insiders predicted it would disappear within a week of release. But something magical happened during filming. The cast and crew, knowing they were working on something special despite the microscopic budget, poured everything into the project. Stallone rewrote scenes on the spot. Avildsen captured moments of raw authenticity that expensive films could never achieve. The famous running up the steps scene was filmed at dawn with a Steadicam operator chasing Stallone up the Philadelphia Museum of Art stairs while curious joggers watched. The entire final fight scene between Rocky and Apollo was filmed in one take, 15 minutes of brutal, exhausting combat that left both Stallone and Weathers genuinely injured and gasping for air. The movie wrapped in February 1976. Total cost: $1.1 million. Nobody expected Rocky to be anything more than a modest success at best. United Artists scheduled a limited release for November 1976, planning to dump it into a few theaters and move on. The advertising budget was minimal. No major stars to promote. No special effects. Just a simple story about a boxer that audiences had seen 100 times before. The first preview screening was held in July 1976 in a small theater in Westwood. Stallone attended, sitting in the back row, sweating through his shirt with anxiety. He'd bet everything on this movie: his marriage, his credibility, his future. If it failed, he was finished in Hollywood. The lights went down. The movie started. For 2 hours, Stallone watched the audience watch his film. They laughed at the right moments. They fell silent during the emotional scenes. And when Rocky went the distance, when he lost the fight but won his dignity, when he called out for Adrian in that broken, bloody voice, the audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause. Genuine, thunderous, standing ovation applause. Stallone sat in that back row and cried, not quiet tears. Body shaking, overwhelming sobs of relief and vindication. He'd been right. Rocky worked. The gamble had paid off. Rocky opened nationally on November 21, 1976. The first weekend box office was solid but not spectacular, $5.5 million. Respectable for a low-budget film, but nothing to indicate what was coming. Then something extraordinary happened. Word of mouth exploded. People who saw Rocky told everyone they knew to see it. Theaters that had planned to drop it after 1 week kept it for another week, then another, then another. By December, Rocky was the #1 movie in America. By January, it had crossed $100 million domestic, an astronomical figure for a $1.1 million film. By the end of its theatrical run, Rocky had earned $225 million worldwide. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory came on February 20th, 1977, when the Academy Award nominations were announced. Rocky received 10 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Stallone, Best Actress for Talia Shire, and Best Original Screenplay for Stallone. 10 nominations for a movie that almost didn't get made. For a script written in 72 hours by a nobody that everyone had told to give up. The Academy Awards ceremony was held on March 28, 1977. Stallone sat in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion wearing a rented tuxedo, surrounded by Hollywood royalty. He was nominated alongside some of the greatest actors in the world: Peter Finch for Network, Robert De Niro for Taxi Driver, William Holden for Network, Giancarlo Giannini for Seven Beauties. He knew he wouldn't win Best Actor. He was fine with that. Just being nominated was vindication enough. Best Picture was announced last. The nominees were All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, Network, Rocky, Taxi Driver. These were masterpieces. Network was a brilliant satire of television news. All the President's Men was a taut political thriller about Watergate. Taxi Driver was Scorsese's dark psychological portrait. Bound for Glory was a beautiful biography of Woody Guthrie. And Rocky was a simple story about an underdog boxer. Jack Nicholson opened the envelope. He smiled. Rocky. The Shrine Auditorium exploded in applause. Producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff rushed to the stage, followed by John Avildsen and the cast. Stallone stood and walked toward the stage in a daze. This couldn't be real. 2 years ago, he'd been selling his dog for $25. 1 year ago, he'd been turning down $360,000 because of a principle that everyone told him was stupid. Now he was standing on stage at the Academy Awards as part of the team that had just won Best Picture. In his acceptance speech, Chartoff said, "We'd like to thank Sylvester Stallone, who wrote this beautiful screenplay and brought this project to us." Stallone stood there, trying not to cry on national television. He'd won. Rocky had won. The underdog story had become an underdog reality. Stallone didn't win Best Actor. That went to Peter Finch posthumously for Network. He didn't win Best Original Screenplay. That went to Paddy Chayefsky for Network. But none of that mattered. He'd proven everyone wrong. Every agent who'd rejected him. Every producer who'd said he wasn't leading man material. Every person who'd told him to take the money and be grateful. He'd written a script in 72 hours about a man who just wanted one shot at dignity. And in refusing to compromise on that script, he'd taken his own shot and won. The script that changed cinema was written at a rickety table in a tiny apartment by a broke, desperate, stubborn man who understood that some things matter more than money. Who understood that you can't write an authentic story about fighting for your dreams if you're not willing to fight for your own. Decades later, Rocky would be preserved in the National Film Registry as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Film schools would teach Rocky as a masterclass in 3-act structure and character development. It would spawn 7 sequels and a spin-off franchise. It would generate billions in revenue. The Rocky Steps in Philadelphia would become a tourist destination. A statue of Rocky would be erected at those steps. But the real legacy of Rocky isn't the money or the sequels or the cultural impact. The real legacy is what it proved, that a nobody with a 3-day script and impossible determination could change everything. That betting on yourself, even when everyone says you're wrong, is sometimes the only bet worth making. Sylvester Stallone bet on himself in 1975. He turned down $360,000 to play a character he decreated in 72 sleepless hours. Everyone said he was insane. They were wrong. He was Rocky, and Rocky always goes the distance.